In today's episode of the Rueda Conversations, we have with us Kunal Purohit. Kunal has been a journalist for over 13 years, writing on issues of development, politics, inequalities, gender, and the intersections between them. He has received Ramnath Goenka Awards for Excellence in Civic Journalism, the Statesman Award for Rural Reporting, and the UNFPA Ladli Media Awards for Gender-Sensitive Reporting. He is the author of H-Pop, the secretive world of Hindutva pop star, which connects three disparate popular subgenres of music, poetry, and publishing under the umbrella of H-Pop. The term has gained considerable traction in both popular and academic dialogues. In these conversations, Kunal speaks about the book and beyond on Hindutva, arts, and its life in India. One thing I really want to start this conversation off is, how do you find or how do you arrive at this use of this word of Hindutva pop? Like how appropriately it actually explain the phenomena that you're talking about.
Well, it's a great question to begin with, Mukesh, and thank you for having me here. I know that we've been trying to do this for a while, but I'm delighted to finally be with you because knowing what I know of your work, I think what you're trying to do is extremely important and extremely pertinent, and I hope that your scholarship lends a lot more of our popular understanding of what is happening in the country. And I hope to learn a lot from this conversation with you, in fact. So I would actually think of this as a dialogue more than an interview in so many ways, because I think you're doing such crucial work on the ground. In terms of what H-pop is and how I arrived at it, look, it somewhere emerges from my own experience of having covered religious hate, having covered instances of how religious hate was being activated and weaponized, and resulting in violence on the ground. I sought to understand that whole process before the violence, not just the violence, not just the act of the violence. And in trying to sort of, come up with explanations which could make sense, and sort of give us a deeper insight into why people had suddenly found themselves, to be in the throes of religious hate towards communities that they had always had the exposure to, that they had always sought to live in a harmonious, or at least a patchy sense of harmony with, right? What suddenly explained their this sort of new outlook towards them, this outlook of them being enemies and of them having to fight this almost existential battle with those communities. In trying to understand why that was happening, I sort of, tried to see what were some of the factors that were influencing people on the ground. And what I realized is that in our understanding of that process before the event, I think there was a major gap in popular scholarship, at least, or sort of popular. And when I say scholarship, I don't necessarily, mean academic scholarship. In fact, I look at it as a smaller component, because my work is primarily journalism. So in my understanding of what we had been able to track and understand in the media, I think there was this big gap which didn't seek to explain how were people being mobilized by the Hindu right wing outside of these sort of conclaves or these these gatherings of Hindu right wing activists, which would often result in hate speeches by different actors, and that would be covered by the media. So when it would result in a hate speech is when it would sometimes, and not always, also sometimes it would come on the radar. My question always was, what beyond these, right? What beyond these activities, or what beyond what we see on social media? Because our sort of worldview tends to now be obscured by what is happening on social media and conflating it with what is happening on the ground. So in that quest to understand what more beyond these events is when I came across these three different genres of popular culture that I thought had been transformed so dramatically that they could in themselves be subgenres of sorts, right? And so when I say three different genres, I mean poetry, music, and literature. And then in trying to sort of create a construct of what I was seeing is when I thought that it would be more helpful to look at this sort of burgeoning new phenomena that we were seeing, which is the use of popular culture by the Hindu right wing or the Hindu right wing ecosystem to popularize the message of Hindutva, to normalize some of its most core sort of philosophical points, and in the process to radicalize more and more people. Right, so it's this broad sort of phenomena that we are seeing of a new strand almost of popular culture emerging, that I chose to call Hindutva pop. And I thought this would explain things much better than trying to sort of understand them separately as disparate things that are happening. Because I think what we're seeing um, is a particular focus on popular culture as a form of strategy by the Hindu right wing, uh, to be able to sort of escape so many of these roadblocks, if I can call them, in Hindutva trying to popularize itself with the masses. And so I mean, once we sort of start talking about other aspects, I would want to delve into what makes Hindutva pop a more potent strategy than some others. But I think it's important to understand that this is a well crafted, a very clever strategy by the Hindu right wing to lay emphasis on popular culture as a vehicle through which Hindutva can then be transported to different homes.
Yeah, I think this is very critical because broadly, in my particular project and the project, this is part of initiative to study. Their focus is okay. We are looking at hatred, and hate crime is a very small part of it because hatred is an everyday violence. Very subtle, generational. I would say even like families, schools, neighborhoods, everything. And one of the way it works is basically otherization. So when you don't interact with the quote unquote other in a social environment which is very conducive, you tend to kind of otherize them, and otherization is the basic block on which we build. So I think otherization is the first step. So this process of otherization, specifically Muslim in India, it's been a long process. So as you said, like this thing's been happening for over a long time, and it takes a certain kind of elements which has been under construction for a long time to come together and cross that critical mass or in term of threshold to be converted into hate crimes. And and of course there is a larger political system at work which looks which which is looked at as a conducive by the Hindutva, right? So then they see that this is a good environment for it to act out. And maybe in future when that change, the hate crime might go down. Maybe. I'm not sure. Let's say be hopeful. But this process of otherization is certainly uh, a, a, a big thing that's going to stay with us, right? So, yeah, I think that thank you for helping us with kind of laying it out. Uh, One thing is very important that you spoke about two kind of scholarship, journalistic and scholarly, right? uh, I think the one of the best thing that I came across in reading a lot of journalistic writing on HPOP, and there's been quite a number of it, because that gives you a very granular details of what is happening on the ground. Scholars work more on phenomena, and ethnography is a very small part of it. And as a scholar, because their focus is on a particular area for a very long time, I would, for my PhD, would work on Bikaner for, say, let's say a couple of years. So no matter how deeply I work, my ethnography is again very small, right? And I would try to kind of theorize and understand phenomena. It has its own merits, but I think when these kind of journalistic writing, even a 1500 words or 800 words report come from a corner where no one else is working,
Yeah,
it is much more comprehensive in a way to understand a sociological phenomena. Okay.
absolutely.
I mean, scholar actually develop quite a lot on journalistic writing. because a lot of most things that what we call in academia new scholarship is basically building on this journalistic writing. So I think what your book does is
Absolutely true.
what your book does is interestingly basically bringing them together. So there is a very hardcore ethnography, but also then you're trying to understand. And again, I mean, I think we had this conversation that one of the criticism that you got for your book that you kind of humanize these figure. And with my own experience, I shared with you that one of the H-pop singer with Vyas, I have known him for a very long time. Yeah, I mean, this is a call that we take when we write on someone. So it's interesting that, okay, if Kavi Singh, before becoming Kavi Singh or when she is not performing, what is an everyday life? And that everyday life could similarly reflect a lot of Hindutva pop or Hindutva supporters' life, like, their worldview, how they think and how they operate, what are the logic they work with. So my next question would be, when you came across these three genre, because music is again very popular, but I think literature and poetry was something which is, again, I mean, like people like me who mostly scroll through digital media when I stay abroad, I mean, I don't get to read a lot about other things. How do you think that these three working together as like complementing each other?
Right. So I think what's essential to understand is again, I think that whole conflation that we now have with believing that the online world accurately and wholly represents the offline world, right? And then what is happening on the ground, and I think I was very certain that I wanted to break away from it. I didn't want this book to be about online figures, because there has been a critical amount of work that has been done on that front, where we now understand the online Hindutva ecosystem a lot better than we did, say, 4 or 5 years ago as well. So there has been a lot of work on that, but as I said, there's not been enough work on what happens in places where the internet penetration is as not as strong, right? Or what happens in places where none of the popular social media platforms that we track are accessible, or are sort of seen as platforms that are enticing enough for people to be on it. So how does Hindutva make its way there is the question that I wanted, sort of answers of. And which is why one of the things that I sought to do is to try and understand what are the more popular ways in which general entertainment is defined in some of these areas, right? How do people entertain themselves? What is the kind of pop culture that they are consuming, beyond sort of the seemingly monolithical Hindi film industry, Hindi film music, and so on. What is, if we can move away from it and see what are some of the other lesser known ways in which that people are seeking to consume popular culture. And as you know, and as so many others know, poetry recitals or kavi sammelans have traditionally been a sort of a form of mass entertainment for decades now, right? And then we have wonderful scholarship to sort of break it down, even in the past century or so as well, the importance that kavi sammelans have had, not just in being tools of entertainment, but also being places of political mobilization, especially the anti-colonial mobilization that we've seen, right? So there has been that history of it, and I wanted to understand whether that still continues, and if it does, how much of a punch does it really pack in these times of social media platforms, of having different sort of popular culture forms to access with a few links and so on. So I chose to look at that, and my initial inquiry that I made, just to understand whether this is even something that I should invest more time and effort in. Mukesh, it blew my mind, because what was happening in what we didn't see is that, not just on the offline, but also in the online, Kavi Sammelans are a very, very widely watched sort of form of content. So people who are sitting across the country, sometimes even across the globe, are watching these Kavi Sammelans on YouTube channels, and there are YouTube channels dedicated to telecasting these Kavi Sammelans completely. Now, what these YouTube channels then started doing is started, not just having the whole Kavi Sammelan broadcast, which is a 5 hour, 6 hour thing, but then cutting it shorter into different poets, and then within those poets also cutting shorter videos of poetry that they think would do well, right? And in my analysis and my understanding of what was doing well, quote unquote well, on platforms like YouTube and so on, was that a lot of Hindutva poetry was doing extremely well. It was extremely viral. And so I sort of wanted to understand that part better. And then I slowly, this is even before I decided that I wanted to do this. And I slowly started entering the real world in which these events were happening, and who the act on. And what I found was exactly this: the online popularity was only mirroring the offline fame and popularity that some of these poets were having and were enjoying. A lot of the poets that I looked at were people who were constantly traveling across the country, crisscrossing the country, attending different Kavi Sammelans, so sometimes traveling for, say, 20 days a month or so, right? And then going to different places and reciting that kind of poetry. So for instance, Kamal Agne, who's the character who I profile, who's the poet I profile in the book, one of the three characters. His poem on Gandhi's assassination is a massive hit in this world, right? And then the poem essentially is a 14-minute long recital, which looks at not just the conditions before Gandhi's assassination, but sort of tries to make the listener understand why Gandhi's killing was absolutely necessary, and justified, and needs to be celebrated, right? So that glorification of that moment of Gandhi's assassination comes with its own share of Hindutva radicalization, which is that that the Muslims were being flooded, and Hindus were endangered in their own country, and Gandhi chose to look the other way, and so on. I realize that this is extremely, extremely potent. And when Kamal is going in and delivering this in so many different places, he becomes the carrier of Hindutva thought, right? Because so much of his poetry is echoing exactly what Hindu nationalists have been saying for decades now. And I felt that this was important to track. I mean, I wanted to try and understand what is the reception to his work when he goes to different smaller, and not just the cities, but the smaller towns, smaller villages sometimes as well. Or he would address gatherings where, three or four different villages would come together and listen to him. So I wanted to understand this world, and similarly with literature, because I think somewhere we've lost track of books, and how they become carriers of Hindutva thought. And I wanted to understand what that world was like. And I to my sort of utter surprise, I found that the person who I finally profile in the book, Sandeep Dev, who runs a publishing house which only focuses on publishing Hindutva books, Sandeep Dev sells 25,000 books every year, right? And he ships to different places across the globe. I know of some of the patrons who patronize Sandeep Dev, who live in the UK and so on, right? So what I saw was this absolutely, sort of, it was a bit of a revelation, but this absolutely new world opening up to me, which showed me the boundaries of H pop consumption were not regional. They were not local. They were not regional. They were not even national. They were transnational in so many ways, where people outside of the country were consuming H pop and patronizing H pop, and funding some of it, so that the artists here could sustain themselves and do more and more and bigger things with H pop. And I felt like this was important to understand.
So lot of them actually look at this is as a long struggle, like, because Kavi Sammelan is been appropriated or been used by them. A lot of these religious gathering called Jagrata, Bhajan, Satsang again is been used for singing and poetry both. So they lot of them actually look at it as a unfinished project of freedom, like because when Godse assassinated Gandhi, there is a book that came which was banned. मैंने गांधी को क्यों मारा?
Why I killed? Yes, yes. And there are multiple now English translations of
Yeah.
it as well.
So there is I think it's a long process in the making, and somewhere it's my personal and limited reading that they think now this is a very crucial time for them to kind of push back against this whole thing. So uh, I want to ask you, you profiled three people, and I'm sure before beyond these three people you came across even tens of those people like singer. What is there something particular about the demography of the people who are actually becoming face of H pop, and why those are doing better than the, let's say, rest of them? Is this the content or the way they operate?
I think it's multiple factors on the second part of that question, Mukesh. I don't think it is one factor in particular. Um, because it's you take any song for instance, right? I mean, any song that makes it big or becomes a chart buster. There is no certain formula that the artist is sticking to for every song of theirs. Some of the biggest names in that industry will still suffer from songs which just fail to take off, and other songs which become part of people's sort of imagination and become such exciting hits that they remain on the chart for a very long time. So the same is with H pop in some ways, right? Um, I saw artists who struck gold with one song, and then they try to replicate as a template of sorts, and then they fail to make it big for the next number of songs, and then suddenly one song again makes it big. So there's a very interesting trajectory that I found in so many of these artists where in some ways they're left grappling as to what will work. So what happens is they try and hit every note that there is to hit, right? So for instance, if someone has is one of the H pop artists has tasted blood with Hindutva rhetoric, what she or he will try to do is at every point that they think that the Hindutva rhetoric is gaining popular traction on some subject, they will create a song on that. um, and often the song doesn't work, right? And sometimes the song works. So it becomes a bit of a trap for them as well, because they know that they've tasted success with this once, and hence they might taste success with them again, but they don't know what was it that they did right. And sometimes it's also the algorithms, right? Because
Yeah.
the distribution of H pop songs is so heavily based on social media platforms, that sometimes it's just the algorithms which mess around with them, and they don't seem to understand it. And I'll give you an example of this. Kavi Singh, who's the singer in my book as well. The first song that she ever sings is a song on the Pulwama terror attack of 2019, 14th Feb 2019. When 40 paramilitary soldiers have been killed as a result of a suicide bomber's attack on a convoy. And the song is essentially, again, sort of pushing the Hindu right wing line that it's not just this terror, it's not just this terrorist to be blamed, it's not just Pakistan who is to be blamed if Pakistan has been helping this particular terrorist. It is it is this community which is to be blamed, essentially. Essentially it is saying that it's not just them, it's all of the people who are living in India who are Muslims, and who have in some way or the other aided and abetted terrorists like him. So we must go for them and not just for this one guy, right? The song becomes an absolute smashing hit. And this point, Kavi doesn't really, and nor does her father, have a very clear understanding of the fact that she is going to be a Hindutva star. They just know that that they need to make her big. And I don't want to give a lot more, because I don't want to sort of spoil it for people who might read the book after this. But the idea is that she needs to be a pop star at this point. And we don't really know how that pop star journey is going to be, and what kind of song. So, with a song which has very clear Hindutva undertones to it, um, the next few songs, then they're in a bit of a dilemma, because what do you do? Do you continue with this? And so that journey is very interesting, where she's basically trying out different models and different forms. So after that, the next song that she does, and this is just before the elections, if you remember, 2019, she creates a song which is a song about voter awareness and how citizens need to do better when it comes to registering and going out to vote and so on. And it's not really a very political song. I mean, it's definitely not a H-pop song, and the song doesn't do well, right? And the song is just sort of sings. And then she does another song which is talking about the glorious history of India, and while there is a Hindutva subtext to it, it's not an out and out Hindutva laden song. So again, that song doesn't do well. And then so she's grappling, saying, okay, what worked last time, what is not working here. And then she again sort of sort of looks at the Hindutva line a lot more and says, okay, I'm just now going to stick to this rhetoric because this maybe worked, right? So there is that process of discovering what works, what doesn't work. And even on that Hindutva rhetoric, one of the songs that does then make her big is a song that she times the revocation of Article 370 in Kashmir, right? Where she finally sort of does a song on the day that the bill is first introduced in the Rajya Sabha. That night is when she records the song, and the next morning when the Home Minister comes to the Lok Sabha, the song is already out. That song makes it big, right? So now and what happens is she's wondering whether Hindutva works, and clearly Hindutva works on Pulwama, then it works on Article 370. But now what she's also trying to do is figure out if the algorithm has made it work, right? Because by now they've realized that, okay, maybe it is the fact that we're doing it right on that moment, that point in time, that it's helping us work. So essentially what I'm trying to say is that artists also have this journey of discovering what works, what doesn't work. And hence often they don't have a clear understanding of, I mean, they think they know it, and then YouTube will just tweak the algorithms a bit more, and then they're again sort of in this orbit of self-discovery. So that often is the case with some of these artists. On the first part of the demography of these actors, at the outset, what was interesting to me, and I think it also spoke a lot of how the Hindutva project wants to be seen. All of the three characters in my book conversations about caste. They refused to. They sort of steadfastly said that we don't want to. We just believe that that there shouldn't be caste in this world. We believe that Hindus should look beyond caste, and we don't follow the caste system. So we don't believe in the caste system at all. And so my question would always be, what caste do you belong to? And to which they said, we don't want to entertain this questioning at all, because we don't want our caste to be known to people. We want to be seen as Hindu and Hindutva stars who care about all Hindus, not just one particular caste group. So all three of them refused to disclose their caste to me for the book. And then while like anyone else who's working on the ground, I have a fair idea about what caste groups they could belong to. Legal legal restrictions ensured that I couldn't write things which they had not consented to. Right. So unfortunately there was that happened. But as I said, I think that this moment speaks a lot about how the Hindu right wing wants to be seen engaging in conversations of caste, and it becomes so much more critical now when we are talking of the caste census, and when there is mobilization around the idea that that there is a large proportion of the country which is not Asian, and they've not been able to get the deserving sense and the fairer sense of representation in various spheres. So at this point, it becomes even more important to understand that this is how the Hindu right wing wants to be represented, which is that we are above caste, we do not engage in caste, and we don't want our caste to be discussed, because that's not where we want to go, right? We want to appeal to this sort of universal sense of what Hinduism, what it means to be a Hindu, and what Hindutva is, which is to essentially unite Hindus and not divide them. But what I did notice was that Hindutva pop uh, actors, or the people who are engaging in creating content, drew themselves from a very diverse group. So I could see people from different caste groups. There were a lot of OBCs that I saw whose work is out there. um, so at the base level, the entry barrier is not too high, right? The entry barrier is you literally having the skills or the talent to create H-pop content, and if it goes viral, then then it's great. But what happens is, as you keep going higher and higher, so you deliver a song or a poetry, or you come out with a book, and it becomes popular, and you're in the next sphere. But the next few barriers then, is when your caste sort of starts to matter. Because what happens is, at some point, the Hindu right wing steps in and platforms you, or takes you to the next level, right? Where you're either seen in VHP Bajrang Dal rallies, or some of their events, or you're seen in the BJP's election rallies and campaigns and so on. And sometimes that is where caste matters a lot more than at the very bottom, where anyone could really become a Hindutva pop star. Here it is up to some of these right wing groups to decide if they want to hold you up as a card, or as a confirmation that any caste group can make it big in the Hindutva sphere, or if they want to only project a certain caste group coming in and making it big, right? So this is where caste begins to matter a lot more, and not at the ground, not at the bottom. So the bottom is that much more, I mean, slightly more egalitarian, I would say, in terms of, if you have the capital, if you have the skill, if you have the privilege, then you can get in. But then as you go higher and higher, other factors start to determine whether you remain there, and whether you go bigger than there, or no.
Like, that's very enlightening. So that brings me to two things. I think in the last conversation we spoke about this one edge pop's influencer, not a big star, and he sang a song in defense of the houses which were being demolished by bulldozer in Uttar Pradesh. So now I look at them as there's a three figure. They are performer, they are kind of activist, and they are influencers. So influencer are very tied to their audience, right? So of the three figure that you profiled, I think Sandeep, there was someone who was very clear what he wants, what he doesn't want. He said, "Oh, these are not Hindutva enough. I don't want to entertain them." But the other two are kind of meandering through. Okay, what will go hit? So so if the algorithm changes, and if they think that the political environment had change, do you think that there might be a change in instances, because there are more of course there are three of them when they get a choice. They can be activist, performer, and influencer. But at the end of the day, it also, as you profile, this is also about larger Hindutva project, but there are also individual aspiration.
That's a great question, Mukesh, because essentially what I believe is that H-pop is a product of this particular time and space that we find ourselves in as a society, right? Um, H-pop is not just to do with the political environment, and it does play a big role in sort of ensuring that H-pop becomes this sustained sort of industry in itself. But it has a lot to do with the societal acceptance to Hindutva rhetoric all around us, right? Um, we've seen previous instances also where popular culture has been utilized to spread the message of Hindutva, to mobilize people on Hindutva issues. I mean, right back to the Ram Janmabhoomi movement, where, as Peter Manuel writes, the essence of the cassette culture at that point, where cassettes were basically being used as a tool to indoctrinate people, to entertain them with bhajans and songs around the Ram Janmabhoomi movement, but also to rouse them with speeches to mobilize them, and so on. So we've seen that there have been spurts of popular culture being used to mobilize people, especially on the issue of Hindutva. But what has not, what has not worked in its favor is that public mood and the public sentiment has not been as receptive. Overall ecosystem has not been in place for it, right? So we've had small sort of um, silos in which it has worked, but there hasn't been this sort of sustained ecosystem that has been created, uh, which has happened this time, right? Where what we're seeing now is honestly a galaxy of actors essentially trying to normalize Hindutva, in a way that more and more content can keep coming out, and it will resonate with people. So when I say a galaxy of actors, look around, and you'll see that right from those people who are sending you those WhatsApp messages on your group, to YouTubers who are constantly day in and day out talking about that, um, to the news media, to the mainstream television news media, which is telling you of the various types of jihads that Muslims are waging on Hindus, right? We're seeing this constant reiteration of the Hindutva message from so many people. And it's in this moment that H-pop comes and is able to spread itself, is able to popularize itself. So without this ecosystem, H-pop, in my sense, would find it difficult to still have the mass appeal that it needs, right? Because um, at this point, H-pop and pop stars are so heavily dependent um, on the sort of the patron who is sitting on his screen so many miles away, and liking their videos or sharing it, or sort of sometimes either donating it directly, like in Sandeep Dev's case, uh, on his YouTube. There is that super chat option where people are sending him money while he speaks. So in the absence of this kind of patron client relationship that social media has enabled, H-pop stars would find it difficult to find ways in which they would be able to sustain themselves, right? Um, and which is why I believe that I think it's not just the political forces at this point that have made it possible. It's honestly the creation of this entire ecosystem that has made H-pop possible. The question then is, with a realignment in political forces, with a realignment in who remains the dominant political party in India, would H-pop go away? I think what has happened is, Mukesh, in the last 2 or 3 months in India, I think we find some answers on that front, which is that even if the BJP clearly seems to be on the wane in terms of its dominance from its peak position, right? Uh, Even if we see that allies are now mattering a lot more, even if we see that the prime minister is clearly diminished in his popularity and in his standing in India's sort of political spectrum, we're still seeing that the Hindu right wing is constantly mobilizing people more and more, and finding newer things to mobilize people around, right? Um, for instance, I try to tabulate this, and in the 1 month since June 4, when the results were delivered, and if you remember, those were also the times when there were, these sort of possibilities that were being speculated about how the India alliance might come to power and not the BJP and so on. So there was all of that sort of liberal wish thinking that was happening. What I saw was actually on the ground, there were repeated instances of hate speech and hate speech rallies that were taking place anyway. They were constantly ongoing. And I mean, I don't remember the exact number now, but I calculated the number of hate speech rallies that Hindutva Watch, which is this online sort of track database which tracks hate crimes and hate speech. It found more than 30 odd instances of hate speeches being delivered in that 1 month alone. Right. So what you're finding is that societal acceptance is still there. And I don't think electoral results will really shape that to very large extent, because I think the Hindutva project has gone into a very crucial position. Whereas you were saying it has now seeped into the everyday, right? The otherization is no longer event specific. It is now a part of the everyday parlance of people's vocabulary. And so I think an immediate setback will not really necessarily change the trajectory of H-pop. It's only a larger sort of realignment of our politics in society right now that might change something. But at this point, it doesn't seem like H-pop is going away for a while.
So you spoke about patron, like people donating. When I was reading about the history of Hindutva, right, especially the mobilization, at a lot of different juncture, like from Hindu Mahasabha to Chansang, even the Ram Janmabhoomi Andolan, there were patrons who were funding them, right? Businesses and all. In social media ecosystem, lot of time it's the people, the audience who pay, and because they recirculate the content, YouTube and these platform give them money. Is there any larger uh, patronage system which is not this crowd? Because I would like to believe that this is not the crowd or the audience that is sustaining them. Like what for instance, what Sandeep Dev is running, it's not possible because before you get to the public, you need lot more resources, right? So if you could speak little about this kind of, we know about the political support, we know about the ideological support, ideological base, audience and everything, but the one point that if you could speak of the patronage in terms of economic, the monetary.
Right. So I think in this world of H-pop, Mukesh, what's interesting is that it's not necessarily the money itself that that remains important, or the most important sort of factor beyond ideology for these H-pop stars. What often helps H-pop to thrive and some of these stars to sustain themselves uh, are a couple of other things, right? One is platforming. So, for instance, if they're seen on the platforms of a BJP or a VHP or a Bajrang Dal or any of these Hindutva outfits, what happens is suddenly they are able to add more and more people to their follower base, and then suddenly it also sends a message out to so many of these different organizers of events across the country that this person is on the green list, right? This person, and that this person now can be platformed at various other places and can be sort of helped and can be patronized. So what would be interesting is often in so many of these places, some of these H-pop stars, once they started going for these a Bajrang Dal and VHP sort of events, or they started helping, as I say in the book as well. I have given instances of how they, behind closed doors, they're helping the VHP, they're helping the Bajrang Dal, they're helping the BJP deliver its messaging on so many issues. So once you enter that circuit, often these organizations also take care of things where, um, so many of the organizers are affiliated to these outfits, right? So they suddenly say, okay, if you're inside and if you're also supporting us, then we'll ensure you get different platforms, and if you get paid and that you are taken care of and so on. So there's that platforming that happens. There's also the access and the clout which helps them again, right? So to be seen with BJP leaders, to be seen among, or even in the Hindu right wing outfits, to be seen with the right kind of people ensures that it sends a message out to their follower base that this person is really going places, this person is extremely committed. That helps them do is it helps them push their follower or their subscriber to also do their bit in patronizing them, right? So it runs in multiple ways. The third thing that has happened, Mukesh, is that the sometimes the government also does its own bit in giving them work, in giving them various ways in which they can sustain themselves. um, so, for instance, Kanhaiya Mittal, who's again a very popular singer, um, he's a devotional singer, but he starts singing these songs which are obviously pro Hindutva, pro BJP, and one of his first such songs in the league is a song that he sings before the UP elections, where he says, "Jo Ram ko laye hain, hum unko layenge." यूपी में फिर से हम भगवा लहराएंगे, essentially saying that those who brought Ram back to us, we will bring them back to power, and we will unfurl the saffron flag again in Uttar Pradesh. What happens is his song becomes a chart buster. His song is everywhere before the UP elections, and it becomes so popular that it pushes the BJP to then enlist Kanhaiya Mittal as a campaigner. So Kanhaiya Mittal becomes a campaigner for the BJP in the UP elections itself, where he goes everywhere and sings these songs. And then he also travels to neighboring parts, to Himachal, Uttarakhand, where elections are also happening, and that is how he sort of grows and grows and grows. Now, what happens is once the BJP comes to power in UP, there is a felicitation ceremony held, and it's not held by the government, but it's chaired by the UP CM Yogi Adityanath, and in that ceremony they decide to felicitate Kanhaiya Mittal, right? And then they also give him money. So it's just at that point, it's not just the money, it's the clout, it's the access, it's the fact that his work has been recognized, that adds to everything that Kanhaiya Mittal is. Right, it sends a message out to the organizers, it sends a message out to the Hindu right wing outfits who would want to platform him. And at that point, Yogi Adityanath gives him a token sum, which Kanhaiya Mittal returns. And in its returning, he says, I want you to use this to buy more bulldozers. Right. And which is a clear message of what his politics is. Um, and that act itself also, again, lends him even more credence, even more fame, even more popularity, even more claps in the Hindu right wing ecosystem. So this is an example of how some of these pop stars grow. It's not just as straightforward as monetary compensation. It is so many different. They're able to grow and sustain themselves. And one last thing that I would want to tell you is that often this kind of work enables those companies, those private companies which are close to the BJP, which are close to some of these Hindu right wing groups, to actually get H-pop stars to work for them. Be it writing slogans, be it writing jingles, be it crafting narratives. Some of these communications firms also enlist the work of some of these H-pop stars and pay them very, very handsomely. Right, so money doesn't necessarily comes in a very straight line for the songs or the poetry that they sing, but the work gets recognized, and then different people come in to take care of them in different ways.
You said that Colonel Mittal and I have read in other places that a lot of these bhajan singer or devotional singer are turning into it. And in Maharashtra, there is a Naradiya Kirtan tradition, and within that there's a Rashtriya Kirtan, which is very integral part of the nationalist movement. Do you see in a longer and specifically to the music, this kind of traditional performances, that they get kind of hampered through these, over a period, the most dominant imagination of the current generation, when they think of Jagran or Satsang, or let's say these Kirtans or the Kavi Sammelan, would be heavily started by these contemporary, like how do you see like these forms surviving beyond the Hindutva?
No, that's a very important question, Mukesh, because I see some of this play out, in my field reporting as well, where the older and the newer clash, right? So in Kavi Sammelans, for instance, some of the older poets who used to recite Veer Ras poetry would off the record tell me that Veer Ras today means praising the Modi government, or Veer Ras today means being jingoistic on the exact themes that the Hindu right wing wants you to be jingoistic about. Which was never the case, which was not the case. I mean, there were some actors who would do this, but it's basically this reconfiguration of what the form must mean, and what the old form was, and there is this tension that I see play out in different ways. I feel like this tension is going to be a feature of uh, every sort of genre that H pop looks at, that Hindutva forces try to weaponize, be it as you said, devotional songs and hymns, be it kirtans and sort of And not just kirtans, but also the idea of the Bhagavad Sapta, for instance, right, where you're basically um, you're basically trying to break down the Bhagavad Gita and tell people what its interpretation is. What we've seen is that there are a lot of these characters who try to give it a different spin, who try to contextualize it in today, and they try to create this sense of like Sandeep Dev does, this sense of a holy cultural war that Hindus are today fighting against Muslims and so on. Um, I see tension. I don't see this to be a very straightforward win for Hindutva, where they can walk into any of these spaces and claim entire ownership of it, because I see that other people are also fighting, right? Other people are also giving it a pushback. The older players don't necessarily like it and see this as an imposition of sorts. So there is that tension that plays out. Um, some of these people, Mukesh, also see it as a temporary phenomenon, right? So what some of the older players in say the poetry circle tell me is that the likes of Kamal will exist till there are beneficiaries who want to impose the Hindutva agenda, right? Or till the organizer feels that it is important to appease the local Hindutva leaders of the area where the Kavi Sammelan is. But once that leadership starts going on the wane, the organizer will feel no obligation to have Kamal Agne, if he's not the best. So then we look at who the best is and get him on board, because sometimes it's also, as I said, it's also about the societal acceptability. Today's society is accepting and is receptive to Kamal's rhetoric, but it may not always be, right? Uh, Today, society is accepting a Hindutvaized version of the bhajan than the kirtans, but they may not always be. They may want to go back to a different form, or they might want to go back to and go to an entirely new form of it. So I think a lot of H pop is based on how society, and that is where the key honestly is. H pop is nothing without society's acceptance.
So, yeah, thank you so much. If there is anything concluding you would like to that I might have missed on, you think it's important to kind of
There's no, I mean, I feel like I think it's been a very, very comprehensive um, sort of conversation, and as I said, I think the bottom line is for people like you who have been tracking it on the ground also, right? And I think this is something that you might also echo, is that at so much of this rhetoric is a product of this time and space. It's not always going to be there. It was not always there. The reason why it exists is because a confluence of factors have made it feasible and sustainable for it to exist. And I think it's important to remember that context always.
Thank you, Kunal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mukesh. It's been a learning experience, this conversation.